I'm Thom Dennis, CEO of Serenity and Leadership. We're a premier culture integration and change consultancy. We help businesses overcome challenges and achieve successful, lasting outcomes whilst always putting their people at the heart of the business. Today, I'm really happy to welcome Naomi Glover. She's an applied neuroscience, learning and leadership development consultant with a mission to bring neuroscience to life. Or in other words, she wants to help us understand more about what is one of the most complicated aspects of our physiology, our brains. So Naomi's going to be talking at our next dialogue about boosting brain health, why it matters to your business. So her talk's going to be on the 10th of March, but I'm delighted she's joining us here today on our podcast. So welcome, Naomi.
Hello, lovely to see you, Thom. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So let's go straight on. Let me ask you, how did you come to be a neuroscientist?
So I've been fascinated by the brain for, well, forever, for as long as I can remember. And I've been coaching and training for about 20 years. And so it was a sort of natural thing for me to be interested in what makes people behave the way that they do, and to say the things they say and think the way they think, and to pick up some of the habits that they have and try to understand more about what can help them to change those habits. And of course, when it all comes down to it, that's all about the brain. That's what makes us act the way we do, behave the way we behave, and do all of the things that we do. So I think it's interesting actually that more people aren't interested in their brains, and I'm really hoping that they will start to be more.
Yeah, well, as you say, there's, I think, probably not that much of the brain is really understood. So what are the latest things about the brain that we hope we will soon know more about? Like, will people suffering with dementia soon be able to recover lost memories, or will we clearly understand how being multilingual benefits our brains?
Brilliant questions. So I've been really fortunate to be able to study this at King's College London, and I've just done an applied neuroscience master's. So we were exploring many of these things, exploring dementia and exploring, the things that can make our behaviors perform better or worse. Dementia research has come on leaps and bounds in recent years, and we're really starting to understand more and more about what can happen in the brain during Alzheimer's, and that can cause these symptoms that look like dementia, lack of memory, and so on. And what we find is that people don't necessarily lose those memories. They're not completely lost. It's just that they find them very hard to access. And so by using different techniques, we can actually help them to access those memories that were a bit difficult to access in the first place, and that they're losing. We certainly know a lot more than we did 20 years ago. Technologies are changing remarkably quickly. So the speed of neuroscience has really taken off. And while we know a lot more now than we did 20 years ago, we're going to know a whole lot more in 10 years' time, because again, the technologies are speeding up. So this combination of being able to use imaging technologies is giving us a much better view of what's going on in the brain when people have dementia, and with things like ADHD and all other manner of things that happen in the brain. And so what we find is that dementia understanding, as it progresses, the techniques are changing. So historically, they were just looking for drugs that could improve dementia and reduce the risk of Alzheimer's. And that's been very, very hard to do. But what we do have is an enormous amount of research about lifestyle factors that we can change that reduce your risk of displaying dementia. So, for example, we see people who've had who've kindly donated their brains to science. Like
when they died.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Afterwards, not during their lives. Although I suppose in a manner of speaking, they do donate because they kindly spend time doing cognitive testing and things throughout their life. And people like nuns, for example, have been a very interesting group of people to study because they have this remarkable lifestyle where they stay social throughout life. They're all eating the same sorts of foods. They're having the same sort of lifestyle. So they're a very interesting group to study. And they've found that many of the nuns in the nun study, which is a famous neuroscience study, had brains that looked like Alzheimer brains. So when they did postmortems, they looked as if they were an Alzheimer patient, but in fact, during life, they hadn't really displayed very many dementia symptoms or any dementia symptoms. So those two things don't necessarily go together. People can have Alzheimer's, but not necessarily display the symptoms of Alzheimer's, or certainly they get much more delayed. So people will retain much more of their cognitive thinking for much longer, which obviously is hugely encouraging for everybody who wants to look after their brain, which should be most people.
That's really interesting, because there's been talk about, for instance, people who meditate and how that actually reforms parts of the brain. Is that kind of the same thing, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a whole host of lifestyle techniques that come under the remit of brain health. And the Lancet, which is a famous journal for medics, just recently published, I think it was last year, published an enormous paper about how we need to be using more lifestyle factors to tackle dementia. And they listed 12 modifiable risk factors that they thought, which appear to point towards 40% of dementia cases. So feasibly, 40% of dementia could be prevented if we were doing the right things throughout life. And those things do include things like meditation, or at least relaxation, improving your sleep, which meditation, of course, helps with, reducing stress levels, better education, which again, meditation is learning a new skill, which would come under education as well. So there's loads, there's so much. It's a very exciting field.
And what about this business about young people being brought up with a couple of languages? We had Francis Guggen on just before Christmas, and he said that had really made a difference to him, being brought up bilingual with English and French. So have they explored that in terms of how the brain is made up or
yeah, they have. And again, it's one of those factors, lifestyle factors, that is very, very supportive of your brain health. And many of the studies look at people who were brought up bilingual. So I don't think there are quite so many studies about people who are learning languages later. But certainly for people who are born and brought up being bilingual, they have this, or appear to have from the research, a better cognitive skills like attention and inhibition. So attention is your ability to choose what you're going to focus on. Inhibition is to be able to remove your attention from something else or to stop doing something. And presumably what they think is going on is, because you're having to pick between these two languages, you've got to be able to choose which one you're going to use, but also inhibit the other one at the same time. And so they have this ability, when they do cognitive testing on them, they find that they perform better on the cognitive tests and they have better attention. They're better able to listen to content when there's distractions around. So in a noisier room, they'd be better able to tune into a conversation. But also they seem to ward off dementia better, which is, again, very encouraging. And there is some research about learning a language later as well. People sometimes find as well in dementia, this is a really interesting thing, that you find that they drop they might drop a newer language. If they've learned a language, they sometimes revert back to an earlier language that they used. So you might lose one language, but maintain another.
Right. Yes. I don't remember any of my Spanish I was taught at school.
Maybe it's time to pick it up again.
So it's been well documented that the pandemic has affected our mental health, for some in a very serious way. So what do you think will be the main effects of the pandemic on our future mental health going forwards?
I think it's already shown to be massively impactful. It's done a lot of good for some people. So some people who were previously finding it hard, for example, or anxiety making going into workplaces, have enjoyed being able to be in their own space. It hasn't all been negative, but for many people, particularly young people, have been affected by mental health issues in schools have gone up enormously. There's been a real increase. There's been an increase in things like the number of people displaying tics, anxiety, ADHD, a whole depression, suicide, I think, has also gone up. So there's a real variety of underlying causes. And sometimes that's been about being isolated, which we know has issues of its own. So people who have been isolated very much so during the pandemic and have been struggling and unable to keep up that level of social contact that they would normally, they have done worse. And loneliness, we know, causes increases in dementia. So again, you have this kind of pattern where people who are more isolated become more lonely, and if they're lonely, then it makes them less trusting. They have lower levels of oxytocin, so then they're less likely to feel that they want to be close to other people, and it can cause this dangerous cycle of becoming more and more isolated. And one of the things I think that businesses need to be mindful of is that if they've had organizations where everybody's been working from home and then gradually they start having people back, if they're forcing people back into the office, that's going to be very different for somebody for their own experience than if they choose to come back. And so that's something I think that I'll definitely want to be talking about in our dialogue, and I think would be a very interesting thing for people to be exploring and considering. There's a big difference between being forced into a situation and being invited into a situation.
Yeah, it is fascinating, this whole business about fear. You know, people talk about anxiety. You know, I was looking at the New York Times the other day, and they've done a series of polls in the US around vaccinations. And what they found is that people who have not been vaccinated are have very little concern about going out and about, whereas the people who've been doubly vaccinated and boosted are incredibly fearful and are self-isolating.
That's very interesting.
So, well, you know, for me, it just points to the two things. One, the illogicality when you're fearful. You know, your brain doesn't function very well, very logically. And the other thing is, I think people are allowing themselves to be influenced by the media, and that is causing a lot of fear. And these are all things that organizations are having to address and be conscious of, I think. So as a culture change specialist myself, I'm really curious to know, do you think that mental health training should be a legal business requirement in the UK?
I do. And whether a legal requirement, certainly an ethical requirement, it seems, given that there is a natural requirement by organizations to look after the health and safety of their employees anyway, we know that they have this legal obligation to do that, but they're not necessarily preparing their managers to enable them to do it. So I think organizations are increasingly recognizing that they have a responsibility to understand disabilities, to give people time if they need time. And they will have seen cases where organizations have been sued for not taking those things into account. But they're still not, most managers are still not feeling like they're prepared to have deep conversations or even middling conversations with their staff about mental health. And I think part of that is about stigma. So mental health traditionally has had this real stigma attached to it. And it's one of the reasons why I'm very interested in introducing this concept of brain health, because I think there's less stigma associated with something when it feels more tangible. Mental health still feels quite intangible to many people, and brain health is, it's wiring, it's chemicals, it's cellular connections, and so when we can see differences in the brain as a result of depression, or as a result of ADHD, or as a result of other mental health issues, that helps people to realize it's not something that they're making up. It's something real, but it's also something you can do something about, because we know that we can continue to rewire the brain throughout life. So it's a hugely encouraging area.
It is interesting. I've been having conversations in one organization, and the HR has been encouraging people to get trained in mental health first aid. And I've come across some resistance in senior management who kind of are accusing them of becoming therapists. And, the attitude is, well, we're here to work, not to therapize. So, can you see that conflict there?
I absolutely can. And I think that there are wonderful things to be said about the mental health first aid approach. I think it's hugely important to have people in an organization that the staff can go to if they are having problems. One organization that I've been speaking to recently have changed their mental health champions to be well-being champions, because they're recognizing that it's broader than just mental health. People need to talk about more than that. And also it reduces the stigma if they can, if they don't look as if they're coming specifically about a mental health problem. But also I think having people in an organization that aren't necessarily the manager, but are volunteers, then it puts the managers in less of a difficult situation. But the managers still need to be informed. The leaders need to be informed. They need to be educated as to their responsibilities in terms of looking after their staff and their mental health, but also the benefits to the organization. So it's all very well to say that, we're not therapists. They're not expected to be a therapist. But if you understand the difference that it makes between somebody being well and having good brain health, and being able to therefore sleep, and being able to concentrate in the office, and being able to make better decisions, that's important to you as an organization. And there are specific things that you can do to support your staff to do that. And that comes through your management techniques and through your leadership qualities. And so, yeah, I think leaders need to know this stuff.
Yeah. So in what ways do you personally look after your brain health beyond, I presume, things like prioritizing your sleep, eating well, and exercising, which I guess is something that we should all be doing all of the time?
So I do all of those things. I think it's easy to underestimate how hard it can be to do the right thing in terms of sleep. I think people say, oh yes, get some sleep. And for many people, that's really difficult. And it can be particularly difficult for women of my age. That can be particularly challenging. And there are, if people have anxiety, it makes it harder to sleep. So again, you get these cycles which can cause, you have increased worry, and so you find it harder to sleep. And so the next day you can't make very good decisions, or you have brain fog, and then you worry, and then you don't get as much work done, and then you worry about that, and then you can't sleep. And so you kind of get this awful cycle going on. Yeah, exactly. So sometimes it's about helping people to break that cycle. And there's a whole load of different points at which we can break the cycle and improve sleep hygiene. So I've had to do that personally for myself. And I've found a whole load of ways in which I can improve sleep hygiene. And one of those is yoga nidra, actually, which is something I've only discovered quite recently, but has been very well, it's starting to be more well studied in neuroscience. And it's a sort of type of meditation, but it really helps you to sleep. And that's remarkable. That has been just life-changing. But also things like the Mind diet, which is a combination of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, which is a whole host of kind of foodstuffs that are found to be better for your brain health. And it's things like lots of leafy green vegetables and all the things that you would expect, and fish and berries. But most people aren't aware of just how impactful that can be for your brain health. Big differences.
So I keep hearing about neuroplasticity. What is that, and how does it apply to the real world?
So neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change itself, to rewire, to create new connections, and that happens all the time. And it used to be thought that the brain was pretty much hardwired after childhood, so you can't teach an old dog new tricks and all of those sorts of things. And that's been completely debunked. We've found out that rewiring happens just constantly throughout life. And while it gets harder, and the brain becomes more set in its ways in some respects, but there are always ways in which you can change it, even after kind of adolescence. And adolescence now is considered to last until 25. So yes. Just to say, I mean, it's that period of plasticity lasts a long time, but it gives us huge opportunities, and we can continue to grow new neurons in some parts of the brain right the way throughout life. And so to my mind, teaching people that they can change their brain, and in fact, it's not just that they can, but their brain is changing anyway. So if your brain is changing anyway, and it's changing constantly throughout life, wouldn't it be quite useful to be more in control of the way in which it's changing? So rather than letting it change for the worse and pick up bad habits and lose your memories and get more brain fog and sleep worse and, put yourself on that path towards poor brain health and potentially dementia, do the opposite and do the things that will train your brain to work better and make better decisions and think better and concentrate better and have better focus. It's all good stuff.
Am I right in saying, because you talked about adolescence going through till 25, I think this is related to your ability to make good decisions. Isn't that the last bit of the brain that develops? And so yes. All the responsibility that we give to and we expect out of teenagers and so on actually is completely unreasonable. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not that it's unreasonable, but we should always be bearing in mind that part of the brain, the front of the brain, is the last part to develop. And so while the risk-taking part of the brain develops and gets all excited earlier, the part of the brain that is able to think about the potential for the future or make really rational decisions based on things far in the distance, that happens much later. Yeah. And so when we see young people making poor decisions or making rash decisions, that's not surprising, and they get told off, and there's this, well, didn't you think you should have known that this would happen?
Exactly.
You can't, it just doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. But I think some of the things that you can do that are most useful with young people is to make them aware of how their brain is changing. And certainly I did that with my kids. And so I'll get the odd occasion where my daughter will come to me and say, I decided, I thought I'd do this, and then I suddenly realized maybe I was doing one of those rash brain things. And so I thought I'd just come and check with you, which is lovely. That's great that she has this ability to kind of interrupt herself and go, oh, I'm not sure whether this is, a strange teenage brain moment, or whether it is a good idea.
But I love that, because I think it does signal, certainly in my experience, the young that are coming through now, sort of in their late teens, early 20s, are they seem to be coming with a lot more self-awareness, and I love that story about your daughter, because that's a huge level of self-awareness, which is brilliant. And actually I think it's very exciting, because the world that we're entering really calls for a much greater level of self-awareness than typically most people have. So we need to end, but just can you give us a quick flavor, because you're going to be talking about brain health at the dialogue. So what can we look forward to?
So I'll be touching on some of the things that we've briefly looked at today, but mostly I'll be thinking about and talking about how organizations can think differently about brain health, and focus on this as a broader concept, and not just something which is an element like mental health that they have to deal with in some way, or that's stigmatized, but something that they can really engage with in order to create the sort of employees and help people to become the sorts of people that they need to be for the future of work. Because we know that the future of work is going to be very different. As you were saying, Thom, organizations of the future are going to need staff who can engage in deeper thinking and make better decisions and communicate with others at a deeper level. So we'll have robots and artificial intelligence and technology who can do the repetitive things that people don't need to think about, and people need to be engaging in these using much more of their executive function, attention, focus, communication, interpersonal skills, and those go hand in hand with having good brain health. So I'll be talking about how organizations can get more of that and make a start.
Great. Well, we're all really looking forward to it. That's on the 10th of March at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So Naomi, if people want to find out more about you and what you do and how you might help them, how do they get hold of you?
I have a website. It's neuro-informed.com, or I'm on LinkedIn and I'm connected with you, Thom, so they'd find me there. And I'd be very happy to speak to anybody who wants to discuss brain health or bringing neuroscience into their organization in any way. Brilliant.
Naomi, thank you so very much. I hope everybody's really enthralled by what you've heard. Do go to Eventbrite. The link is here in the comments, and we'll really look forward to seeing you on the 10th of March at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Thanks very much, Naomi. Thanks.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.